right, people's about it. So Tyreek, right now, if you don't already know, CJ's about to introduce everybody. So people on my live feed, this is a small part of the Cameron Village personal training squad. Um, we got some things in store for you, CJ. This is his brainchild. So CJ, go ahead and take it off.
Thank you, Alex. So we have a Q&A today, partially live and partially I got some questions handed to me here beforehand. Before we get to introducing everyone that's here, I will talk about the format that we got going on. So I mentioned that I have these questions right here, and then monitored also is Alex on his live stream on Instagram, and Sevi is going to be monitoring the YouTube live stream for any questions that come up. So the three of us are going to alternate bringing up a question. We will then pass that question on to whatever trainer we think is going to have the best input as far as an answer, and then the four of us, we discuss it. We're going to figure out, hey, what's the best answer, what might have to bring up, whatever the case is. We can take as many side tangents, in-depth discussions, hypothetical situations as we need to, so long as before we move on to the next question, we answer the first person's question to the best of our ability. Does that make sense? All right.
Sense.
So,
Sense.
before we get into questions, then let's start with introductions. And Alex, let's start with you.
All right, what's good, people? So I am Alex Loudon. I'm the fitness director at Crunch Cameron Village. So I've been in the fitness industry for about 8+ years doing personal training. I specialize in fat loss and in calisthenic movements. I don't do no free weights. We already got somebody for that. So that's just a little bit about me. Anything else?
Hey, whatever you want people to know, that's up to you.
And then as well, I also coach up trainers on how to build up their business from where they're at. So it doesn't matter if you're making 6 figures, doesn't matter if you're just starting. I help trainers do that at the same time. So holla at me.
Okay, I mean that's a pretty unique perspective there, I think, at least compared to who else we got here. I think it's all pretty unique though. Ike, introduce yourself.
All right, what's up, y'all? My name's Ike Smith. I'm at Crunch Cameron Village as well, one of the personal trainers on the staff. I specialize in, strength and conditioning. I'm a CSCS, so Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist, as well as Sevi on this call with us. Personally, I've been in the fitness industry, fitness coaching for about 2 years. Worked with high school baseball athletes. I played high school baseball myself. As of right now, I'm a competitive powerlifter, strongman competition, and like I mentioned, my specialty is, building muscle, putting on size, getting people strong. So that sounds like something you're interested in. Give me a shout. Follow me on Instagram at Ikenstein, IKENSTEIN.
Literally, Ike, if you hadn't mentioned your Instagram, I was gonna bring it up because, if you go look at his Instagram, you want to know what a real strong man looks like follow that handle.
I appreciate
it. All right, Sevi, what about you, man?
How's it going? I'm Sevi. I'm also a strength and conditioning specialist like Ike. I coached basketball at Durham Academy for 3 years between 2013 and 2015. And before going back to grad school to get my master's degree in physiology, after which I started at Crunch a little under a year ago. And right now I also coach basketball and strength and conditioning for Broughton. So Broughton High School varsity boys basketball, that is. And, anything I missed?
I don't think so. How you feel about your boys?
Feeling great. Had somewhat of a down year last year, but got a couple new guys coming in and also a lot coming back. So I'm also really excited because I didn't get to work with them in the off season last year, which is when a lot of the, as you guys know, games will be taking place. So during the season we can focus on maintaining, whereas last year came on sort of towards the beginning of the year, and one of the issues was some of the guys are still learning the exercises when we really just need to be continuing what's going on in the off season. So hopefully this coronavirus won't last too long so we can get back after it soon. And I'm sure that pertains to everybody who's listening as well and their own goals.
Yeah, and I'm absolutely expecting questions about that too. Everyone's stuck at home, gym access, our gym's closed, and I think statewide that's the situation. So how are we going to stay in shape in that? We'll get to that. We're definitely going to get to that. Briefly introducing myself, I'm CJ. I started at Crunch at Cameron Village right when it opened, which I think only me and Josh can say that now. Josh is not joining us today. I started off, my background in fitness was just as a track athlete that fell in love with coaching. And I got my NASM CPT certification in I think the summer of 2018. Scoured for jobs, got one at Crunch, a great interview with Ashton. And I've just fallen in love with it ever since. Everything resistance training, conditioning, like I'm just absorbing as much information as I can all the time. I feel like I'm constantly in this mode of learning and applying. It's a fantastic job. I love our job. I don't know. I think we can all say that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
So, if you guys are ready, I think we can get right into questions here.
Let's do it.
Right.
So, first one. How do you analyze each person and create a unique and beneficial fitness plan to them? I'm handing this off to Alex first because he's kind of that first step for all of us over at Crunch.
All right. So ask the question again.
So how do you analyze each individual person to create a unique and beneficial fitness plan for them?
So I started off by just asking some preliminary questions. A lot of people, when they first get into it, it's kind of like a consultation, and it's like a tense type of moment. But I just try to reduce the stress, reduce everything, just really getting to understand them and how they're moving in their everyday life. So figuring out what they're doing in everyday life to make their program as realistic as possible. And then from there, I do a FMS test, which stands for functional movement screening, which is pretty much the way how your body moves in its natural state, whether if you're sore, if you're just waking up, if you're completely warmed up. When you're doing the FMS test, it really allows me to see what's going on in your body without you realizing it, muscle imbalances and other things of that nature. So that's how I started off there.
Okay, let's. I'm gonna continue that. So Ike, you've got a client now that Alex has done the FMS work with, and now you've got to create a plan based off maybe what their goals are. Let's say you're a strength specialist. Let's say it's a strength client.
Right.
Where are you starting?
So like you said, my biggest thing is first, kind of like what Alex said, kind of trying to decrease that tension. So break the ice, kind of ask them a couple, everyday questions to get to know them first off. And then of course, one of my go-to questions is, what made you come to Crunch Cameron Village and what made you commit to getting a personal trainer? Because obviously if somebody knew what they were doing, then they would have, probably done the assessment, but would have been like, no, I'm good. I kind of got this on my own. So then it kind of depended upon what they respond with. My first things that I like to do, like even though Alex has done the FMS, we're not always there to technically, to see. In the event we're in between clients while he's performing the FMS, then we can kind of get a glance of a potential client. But I usually like to have somebody squat just to kind of see how they move, because a lot of times people are like, oh, I can't do any lower body. It hurts my knees. And then that usually tells me that they're not moving properly. That's I kind of take it a step further as like not doing the FMS, but kind of having a foundation of movements that I like to go to kind of see, like what Alex was saying, how they're moving everyday life. I like to ask them kind of what they do for work, whether they're sitting a lot, on their feet a lot. I got some clients who work from home. So, like they're sitting at the computer all day. So I know first and foremost, we're going to have to do a lot of, posterior chain, upper back, shoulder stuff, kind of things like that. And then as far as like I said, going back to a squat, just making sure they move properly. And then I want to make sure they're moving properly and then build upon that foundation. So for me, it's kind of finding those weak links, correcting them, and then building upon the foundation.
All right, so I think the both of you definitely touched a lot on what's I think probably the most important aspect with someone's fitness journey, which is going to be especially identifying, do they move correctly first and foremost. Let's. I'm gonna keep this question going, moving it to Sevi. Sevi, I want to create something a little more. Maybe this was a friend of mine that asked this question, and his question was, how do you create like the plan overall? And the plan starts that phase 1, right, which is definitely that mobility work. Now we're going into phase 2, which is more goal specific. Sevi, let's say you do a lot with body recomp. What does that phase 2 kind of look like with a body recomp client of yours?
Okay, so I assume we're picking up at a point here where we've kind of already corrected whatever imbalances have already started to take place, given that we're in phase two. So they are already moving correctly, still keeping any like initial detriments in mind. But from there, given that they can perform all the compound movements, I like to base a lot of the training around that, as long as there aren't any contraindications. I know Ike trains his clients or similarly. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So from there, because the compound movements, whether it's squats or some sort of variation, deadlifts, some sort of variations, pushes and pulls, multi-joint exercises are going to recruit the most amount of muscle mass. So in addition to having a greater expenditure, you're going to increase overall muscle mass to a greater degree. Also, the hormonal response will be greater. So I would definitely focus on the compound movements and multi-joint exercises. As long as none are contraindicated.
Kind of piggybacking off of what Sevi says with the compound movements. I mean, obviously we've got clients who either come in, they've got 30-minute sessions or 60-minute sessions. It really, you want them to have the biggest bang for their buck. You don't want them coming in and wasting any time. So like what Sevi said with the compound movements, if you've got a client who's 30 minutes and regardless of kind of what their goal is, whether it be like, fat loss, body recomp, trying to build size or strength, that compound movement, I mean, you're pretty much going to cover all your bases with that. Like you said, the push, pull, squat, hinges, and things like that. And then it's just kind of like the way you would approach, the volume, the sets and reps, depending upon the goal.
Absolutely. And so go ahead.
Yeah, just compound movements, most bang for your buck. And for me, it's just not reinventing the wheel and overcomplicating things for people.
So to elaborate on that, to anyone at home that's not getting some of the trainer jargon, which is something that I'll want to look out for a little bit more speaking, compound movements just refer to exercises that use multiple muscles versus isolation movements, which would be just one. So a squat uses multiple muscles like your glutes and your quads, whereas isolation movement would be like a bicep curl using just the bicep. And I think the compound movements is actually one of the best points that you could have brought up, because the two of you, especially, you work with strength and hypertrophy and things like that and recomp. And so that's very much like just that resistance training focus. But with certain weight loss clients of mine, I might have a focus on conditioning. Maybe some of our workouts will be how many calories can I burn in just this 30-minute session. And even though, that I'm likely that workout is going to entail something maybe more like cardio or HIIT kind of, there's still compound movements that I'm using to drive through that motions, even if they're not under as much resistance. So, I guess to answer my friend's question, how do you analyze? You have to start with movement, right? We make sure that they're moving correctly, and then we decide what movements are most appropriate for their goals and under what resistance. I think in summary.
Yeah, I agree.
Anything to add there?
I think some people, it's a fallacy. Some people think that cardio, you're going to burn more calories than resistance training. However, during that 30-minute session, the way that a lot of us organize it is we'll alternate between like a push and a pull or an upper and a lower so that we can maximize our time. So even if I were, and a lot of my clients are similar to Ike's in that they want to put on muscle, even if I have a fat loss client, that doesn't mean that half hour is going to be much different, because they're still going to be burning the same amount. And for a long-term strategy, doing the compound movements is going to be better at keeping that muscle on. And you mentioned body recomp, so I did want to go ahead and get into the other side of it, because we're only talking about expenditure right now. Well, how do you get to recomp? So you have to take the intake into account. And a good way, if you want to, and recomp the term is a little overused. If you've reached a certain level of fitness, sometimes it's difficult to achieve this. Recomp is losing fat and gaining muscle at the same time. a lot of novice lifters or novice athletes in general can achieve this just simply by eating at maintenance, meaning their expenditure and their intake are equal. Can I elaborate on the nutrition aspect, or do you want to?
I would hold on that just because actually I have a question that later, as this is the information you're talking about is going to be a lot more appropriate for.
Okay.
So, with that being said, Alex, do you have a question off the live stream now that you want to bring up?
Yep. So the question, I actually wrote it down. Somebody asked me this yesterday. So their question was, what if I was with a personal trainer and I can't meet them anymore? What do I do?
That's a great question. Who do you want to hand that off to first?
I want to hand that off to Ike. So the question was, if I had a personal trainer
Right.
before the coronavirus happened, before all of this happened, what do I do? My personal trainer made something for me, but I'm just not comfortable yet.
So I guess when you said so this is all kind of centered around like with gyms closing and everything, not like they were training with them and the contract ended and they just stopped training.
Correct.
Okay. So I guess when you say, the trainer made something for them, like an at-home workout, and they're just not comfortable yet, I guess I would just have that person, if you were working with that trainer, then there should be a certain level of trust, and you kind of have that idea that you can reach out to them. It's like if you don't feel comfortable with something, reach out to them. If you need further explanation, then it shouldn't be out of the trainer's wheelhouse to lend them that explanation of what they were intending for them to do. If it is something, if there's a variation or something that the trainer could provide for that client, I would have the client, of course, I would hope that the client would reach out, like I said, thinking that they could talk over everything with their trainer. Other than that, I mean, not everybody has access to, resistance bands or any kind of at-home equipment. So I would say the biggest thing is, if you're not comfortable, but you still kind of want to see some progress, is be mindful of what you're eating. Because obviously with everything being shut down, whether you're still able to go into work or not, or you're working from home, you're going to be leading a more sedentary life. So to even just maintain the results that you've seen, or to even continue making smaller ones, is just get up and move whenever you can. If the weather's nice, like fortunately it has been the past couple of days, even myself, I'm fortunate enough to have access to some equipment, but even then, just getting out the house, getting some sun, and just walking, has kind of been like my go-to. Even if it's, just down the block or anything, it still beats an extra 20 minutes sitting on the couch. So even if your trainer has provided you a specific workout or something that you don't feel comfortable with, you can still get up and move, within your limit, and still kind of see some progress. Like I said, the main thing is, if you're not going to be leading such an active lifestyle during this time, another thing is really be mindful of your other habits, how much water you're consuming, how much sleep you're getting. Obviously, these are stressful times, so you want to do everything that you can within your control and not really, exacerbate the negativity going on around you. So that's what I would say.
If I can pick up off some of those points.
Yep.
Definitely.
And Brandon just got on too, y'all.
All right, he could have been on here too.
He could have.
So with that, here's the thing. At least just speaking for the trainers like us right now at Crunch, do not be afraid to reach out to your trainer. We're all stuck at home too. Give us something to do. If you have concerns with some of the programming that we've sent you for stuff to do at home, contact us. Before everything, or as everything was going down, I had phone consultations, everyone asking about equipment, and then we made up at-home workouts, kind of on the spot. If you got stuck in that, or if you're not comfortable with something that we programmed, hey, let's undo that. And let's address some of those concerns. But that being said, if you were working with a trainer and then now in general you're not, I think what Ike said is pretty much spot on, which is you still have to address the same concerns you had before, which was your dietary intake and your overall level of activity. And walking is great. Like I'm outside right now. It is gorgeous. I was walking right before we were on this call. So
and let's address.
That was the YouTube live stream. My bad.
That's all right. That's all right. But yeah, I don't know. Keep your health in mind and don't be afraid to contact your trainer. Definitely. Speaking of the YouTube live, whoever has that up, either Sevi or Ike, are there any questions popping up on there that we want to?
Let me try that again without it.
I don't know how to find the comments.
You said you don't, or I mean, I can see if I can. Let's see.
Get up on mine.
In the meantime, I'll elaborate, or I'll
please.
I just want to say that, like, you guys nailed it on that. The biggest thing is, like, just because you used to work with a trainer does not mean like that relationship is done. Like, even yesterday, I would talk to clients that are no longer, coming to see me. I still see them in the gym all the time. So I would think I would not be doing my due diligence as a trainer, even if the client is no longer, paying for sessions. Like, if I were not to continue to see that progress. So I would say, take everything that your trainer has given you. And if you're still confused about that, your trainer should be available to speak to you about that. That rapport should still remain.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, while someone works on pulling up those questions, I'll move on to the next one that I have here, which is, what is a simple, well-known exercise that people are often misperforming, so just completing incorrectly? I'm going to hand this off to Alex first. Honestly, I think we could all do one. Like, there's more than 4. So, Alex, what's your top pick?
Top one. Shucks. There's so many. I'm gonna go with. Damn, I don't want to do one that I know y'all gonna do.
There's no shortage. Just pick
I know
one.
what we're gonna say.
I'm gonna just go with squat.
Okay.
Who's gonna say squat? Nobody.
I actually wasn't.
I know what Sevi's gonna say, because I feel like we're on the same page. Go ahead, Alex.
Hang on. Yeah, this thing.
All right, so I'm gonna go with squat.
Now you're thinking again.
To elaborate on this
somebody
question,
did just ask a question. So Dom, once we get to this, once it comes back to me, I'll answer that. We'll answer that question for you. So CJ, the question was, what's one of the what?
A common exercise that is misperformed.
Okay, the traditional back squat. All right, so just a little pro tip: you can do a high back squat or mid back squat. It really depends upon how you're looking at it. But for the purpose of this, most traditional is going to be the high back squat. That one, there is a big misconception, and guys, come in with me as well, as your knees aren't supposed to be going over your toes. However, it really depends upon your body structure. When we're talking about that, if your body structure, simple way to say it, if your body structure allows your knees to go over your toes, or if your mobility, then you're fine. If not, then you should do some modifications. There's some tell-all signs when we're talking about back squat. Your lower back rounding out, your we'll go on the traditional sense, your knees going over your toes, or your heels lifting. If you have those things going on as you're doing a back squat, there's definitely something going on that you need to correct first. Usually it's more of ankle mobility that I've seen that a lot of people don't have, and then hip mobility. Once you have those two coming in line, then you'll be able to start seeing your squat being performed a lot better. You shouldn't have pain in your knees. You shouldn't have pain in your in anything other than just like, this is some heavy weight. So most definitely the squat.
All right.
Okay.
With this one, I know we can all do it. Go ahead, Sevi.
I was just going to elaborate on what Alex was saying, so I can leave Ike with one I think we had in mind, but
Hey, take it if you want, man.
no, I'm gonna elaborate. So, like another, like with the back squat, like you mentioned, hip mobility and ankle mobility. This can kind of tie into that. One thing that I know I think all of our trainers preach is the glute medius muscle and external rotation. So part of my warm up for all my athletes, whether it's for basketball or at Crunch, use the band right above the knees. Yep, and just laterally walk with it and turn on those glute medius muscles, so that when you descend from a squat and on the ascension, that you're sort of one good cue is screwing your feet into the ground, and so and also you want to have a tripod foot, so that like at the base of your pinky toe, base of your big toe, and your heel are the 3 points of contact with the ground. And one good cue is also pushing your big toe into the ground. I think that's really important so that you don't have knee valgus, which is where your knees go inward. If you train that way, that's how when you go out and play and do something interactive, you're more likely to see something like an ACL injury. However, if you perform the squat correctly and have that proper external rotation, you're going to facilitate injury prevention, which is how resistance training is going to have probably the biggest benefits for athletes. And then on top of that, you mentioned also rounding out at the back. You want to have good thoracic mobility as well. I know we don't have forever, so I won't go into all the different things you can do for that. But those are just a few ways to correct what Alex was talking about. One more quick one, you mentioned heels coming up. You want to make sure your posterior chain is strong enough. So that means like making sure that your mostly everybody is quad dominant. Their quads are stronger than their posterior chain. So making sure your glutes are not only not tight, but making sure they're strong enough. Same thing with your hamstrings. So that'll prevent excessive hinging when on the descension of the squat. And then also that'll help with rounding of the shoulders and keeping your weight back on a squat.
I had a feeling that if you brought up squats, we were going to start talking about a lot of things, because there's a lot of points to touch on with the squat. There's a lot, and that could be possibly an entire podcast by itself. Is just what could go right and wrong in a squat, and then how do you fix those things. And I want to tie that back into the question, the first question that we asked, which is the individual plan. A piece of that I think is really well exemplified by the squat example is you notice what the weaknesses are and you can address those individually. Part of your squat weakness could be weak glutes, weak glute max, weak glute med. It could be immobility in the hip. You have to break down those parts and fix them individually before you finally put yourself under that bar. So that's something that I wanted to note on. Ike, what is this exercise that you're talking about?
I was just talking about like a proper hinge, man. So like a proper hip hinge, which Sevi, was that what you were going to say?
Yeah.
Okay. I knew it.
Yeah.
I see that one misperformed a lot because I guess it's kind of just, when you think back to just growing up, you're like, oh, I could touch my toes. If you tell somebody to touch their toes, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to round their lower back and be like, all right, look, I can touch my toes. But then when you kind of get into the resistance training, you start adding weight, of course, that becomes an unsafe movement because you don't want any flexion of the lumbar spine or your lower back. So that it can boil down to, having tight hamstrings, or it could also just be like motor control. I've worked with a younger population, meaning from like middle school to high school, and teaching a hip hinge, so like a Romanian deadlift, stiff leg deadlift, any kind of deadlift, really. And I found that to be like the most difficult movement pattern to teach people. I remember it was like my first internship I ever did with like, sports performance, anything like that. It was frustrating because you keep repeating yourself, saying the same thing over and over and over again, but it's like, am I saying the wrong thing? But then you kind of you got to learn to be patient. And it's, you get creative with the cues that you give your athletes or your clients. And then one day the light bulb just goes off. So, whenever the next time you bend over to pick something up, keep that in mind. Don't let that lower back round. You want to feel tension throughout the hamstrings and the glutes, not in the lower back. So that's the one that I see all the time being done incorrectly.
Okay.
Hey, CJ.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have trouble also with what Ike is talking about with the mind muscle connection with your hamstrings, especially when they're initially performing it. They only feel it in their back, even if they are doing it correctly. So one thing I like to do is, I wouldn't say pre-exhaust, but I would say activate hamstrings, especially with younger population that struggle, and they say, "Oh, I only feel it in my erectors," or they'll say back, but I know what they mean. But so, like before even performing it, I'll have them do a stiff leg deadlift, but before that, I'll do something as simple as a hamstring curl, so they already have that that activation before going into a stiff leg deadlift. And that will kind of enhance that mind muscle connection. Now, I wouldn't go to exhaustion or to failure or anywhere close like that on it. Not that you would ever on a hamstring curl, but I think that would help with that mind muscle connection, especially with younger populations, as you mentioned. But also keeping a lordotic spine, a neutral spine, without going into back flexion is pretty difficult. And I agree, like that. Like sometimes it's like, yeah, am I just saying this wrong? But the fact of the matter is, some of these athletes, especially in their mid-teens, just aren't biologically mature enough for it yet at that point. Yeah. And maybe even adding a little knee flexion might help with that. But also just making sure that they have that mind muscle connection with the hamstrings, and one cue I like to give for rounding at the back is protect your armpits, like so that they keep their shoulders back.
Right.
And that'll prevent flexion at in the lordotic spine.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
There's just so many talking points.
So
I feel
CJ, we got a question up here up on my live.
All right, what are we looking at?
All right, I like it. It's from my homegirl Dominique. Her Instagram name is DamoSapien_, and she asked, "How many push-ups are too many?"
All right, I want to take this first because there's
I didn't go for it.
because there's not, but I think there's a caveat. All right. It is very easy. If you're someone who can do a lot of push-ups, cranking them out, as many as you can do, 50, 60, 70, whatever, you're not getting what you wanted out of it, right? Actually, that was going to be my answer for the common exercise, was going to be push-ups. You're doing push-ups probably as a substitution for bench press right now, right? You're trying to strengthen or hypertrophy your chest. If you want to do that, the answer is not to crank out as many push-ups as you possibly can. The answer is to do them very slowly. Be really slow on the eccentric or the lowering part of that push-up. Find a way to make it a little bit harder. So do it on an incline with your feet inclined, or find a way to add some resistance, whether that's on your back or with a band. How many push-ups is too many? Find a reasonable resistance and then do it like you would any other set. Take it to failure or a few reps short. However many that ends up being. We're all stuck doing at-home exercises right now. But treat your sets the same, whether you're at the gym or at home.
Yeah, I think whether it's body weight exercise or you're in the gym, it's a resistance training exercise. Regardless, you want to progress no matter what. I mean, the body adapts very quickly. So the main principle of everything, like whether you're trying to gain weight, lose weight, build size, whatever, you got to progress. Because if you're trying to lose weight, then okay, you're in a caloric surplus, so you're expending more energy than you're consuming. All right, you're gonna get to a point where you stop losing weight, so you got to progress and increase that deficit a little bit more. Same thing on the flip side. You're eating more than you're expending. You're gonna plateau, and you got to increase. So it's like push-ups, like CJ was saying. You find a way to kind of make it harder on yourself as you progress. So if you're doing straight up push-ups, like say you're starting out doing push-ups on your knees. All right, you start to do quote unquote too many. All right, then try to do them normally on your feet, so on and so forth, controlling that eccentric. And once something gets too easy, you bump it up a notch.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think CJ, you initially pointed out that you're doing it in lieu of some sort of press, namely bench press. So we want to keep it simple and go back to the normal principles. I mentioned progression. So you still want to see progressive overload. So I think a good starting point would be want to think about, don't do something you can't recover from. If you know you're going to have delayed onset muscle soreness, stop doing the push-ups if you've already reached that point when you know 2 and 3 days later you're still going to be sore. That said, once that adaptation takes place and you've done push-ups on, say, a few different, like 3 days over the course of, or 3 days, over the course of like a week and a half or so, and then you're no longer feeling sore after that, it might be time to add resistance if you have bands, or increase the number that you're doing. But I don't think that if it's something that you have already gained that strength from something like bench pressing in the gym, and now we don't have that equipment, some of those muscles are going to still have the capability to do that many, but a lot of your accessory muscles or like your tendons might not be used to the push-up, because it is a little bit different than a bench press. So I would say, don't start off by doing something that's going to take too long to recover from, because injury prevention should still be number one.
Absolutely. All right, before moving to the next question, I have a task for all the trainers who are on the call, or who are not on the call right now, or who are in the chat. Whenever we use any jargon, go ahead and type in what we're talking about, right? Because if someone doesn't know, immediately what, say, delayed onset muscle soreness is, or what we mean by progressive overload, I don't want any confusion. So if you're in the chat right now, and you know what we're talking about, define those things for us, because I can't stop Sevi every single time he throws out a term like that. All right, moving on to the next question, though. And this is one I think, Sevi, you're going to have a lot to say about. What's more important, fitness or diet?
Okay.
All right, hang on. Everyone say it on 3. 1, 2, 3. Diet. No?
Hey.
All right.
I was gonna say, not to put words in whomever asked this question's mouth, but I think they want to ask what's more important, exercise or nutrition. If I were to create a dichotomy within fitness, that's where it would go. I think fitness also, nutrition is a part of that. Correct me if I'm wrong. So, I do think, I do tend to agree with you, CJ, but I just wanted to unpack that a little bit further first.
Okay.
I also want to say that there is interplay between the two. I won't really get into that right now, but it would now be a good time to go ahead and talk about intake versus expenditure.
Let's hear it, Sevi. Let's hear it.
With regards to body recomp or just in general?
Go for it.
Okay, so let's first attack the expenditure side. There are a few things that go into it. Let's start off with your basal metabolic rate. It's just how much energy it takes in a day if you were just to keep you alive, if you were just laying down. On top of that, obviously, the biggest one, I think it makes up 70% of expenditure on average, is purposeful physical activity, or PAL, physical activity level. Then you have non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is basically anything that's going to expend calories that's not on purpose, but it's still movement related. Some things as little as fidgeting or getting up to go get a drink of water. And then you also have the thermic effect of food. So that's how much energy it takes to digest your food. So estimating each one of those individually, not very practical. However, there are a few things worth noting within that. The thermic effect of food is going to be greater if your diet is higher in fiber and protein. It takes more to oxidize those than it does fat and other sources of carbohydrate. I think the physical activity level, one important thing that we talked about before, Ike and I, and all of our trainers, preach resistance training. So that's going to expend calories, but then also bring us back to basal metabolic rate. By putting on muscle, or at least maintaining muscle, you're going to increase that basal metabolic rate. So if you were to eat at a deficit, or even eat at maintenance, the fat that you're losing is, if you're also increasing how much muscle you have, or at least maintaining it, you're going to keep that basal metabolic rate up. Now, on the exercise side, I think, on the nutrition side, I think the National Strength and Conditioning Association recommends 1.8 to 2.7 grams per kilogram, grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day for intake for weight loss. And so I think that that's important to know. One, it's important in resistance training, for recovery and for building protein. But also on top of that, the like I mentioned before, the thermic effect of food isn't really to be, it's more than negligible. But then on top of that, I think if your goal is to lose weight, then I think eating a moderate deficit of 500 calories per day, so having your intake be 500 calories less than your expenditure every day, is a good way to is the recommended strategy, because if you're going to eat at any bigger of a deficit, then you risk losing muscle, and that's when your basal metabolic rate will go down. And so if you want to, and I'll hand this off to CJ, because I know he and I have had numerous conversations about this, in terms of estimating daily expenditure. There are numerous ways to do that. I don't know if that's something you wanted to elaborate on, given how much we spoke about it.
I can touch on that. And actually, I haven't talked with you recently about some things that I've reconsidered with that, which is, so you just broke down like a bunch of the factors that go into estimating the expenditure, and then you can talk about, and that's expenditure, and then what you eat, that's most of the calories in, and you can break those down into macros, which have a little bit different effects. Now, you talked about estimating that expenditure in the first place. The way that we've been doing it traditionally is through different equations, right? Like, we'll use, say, Harris-Benedict as an example, which they take stats like your weight, height, age, different things along those lines. Gender,
level.
Yep. And then they take all that into consideration, and then they give you a number that's estimating, one, your BMR, which you explained what that was, and then your total energy expenditure. And that's just, they do that by multiplying by an activity factor. I did a lot of in-depth research on those equations, and to keep it simple, they're relatively inaccurate.
They overestimate.
Mostly they overestimate, one of them underestimated, but it kind of doesn't matter. For one, they can still be a starting point, and
right.
Ultimately, that's all they should really serve as, is a starting point. When you're tracking someone's weight loss or recomp, really what you want to be doing is you track calories, you track weight. Did you lose the amount of weight you wanted to? Great, we'll make small adjustments and move from there. If you didn't, well, then we make a bigger adjustment. You get into a larger deficit. The best way to estimate someone's expenditure is just to examine the relationship between how much they're eating and how much they weigh. If their weight's changing, well, then that amount of calories is what's responsible for it, and on top of the activity that they did. All you can do is make your best guess all the time, and you can try to make it as specific as possible, but making it more and more specific, it just gets you caught up in those details. It's not going to end up in better results necessarily. It's kind of, diminishing returns principle there.
Right.
To tie back into the question, though, the reason that I said I jumped to diet so quickly when the answer, or I guess you're talking about nutrition versus fitness, is just that nutrition is mandatory. Like it absolutely is, right? Like if you don't, you meet your RDAs, or your recommended daily allowances of different nutrients, you will be sick. You will have a disease that results from that deficiency. Whereas if you don't exercise, there's lifestyle risk to that, but they're not nearly as life-threatening as not eating correctly. And also, even just being at a healthy weight, you theoretically could do I wouldn't recommend it, but you could do zero activity and keep your calories real low and maintain a reasonable weight. You wouldn't be as healthy as you possibly could, but it's as far as what's more important, that's why I answered diet right away. It's like, that's kind of like, the baseline. And then on top of that, on this pyramid now would be the working out on top of that, the fitness. I don't know if anyone wants to elaborate on any points from there.
Um,
I can a little bit. Go ahead, Ike.
I was just gonna say, man. Yeah, I say diet because somebody who is, willing to make a change can come in and say, "Hey, I want to lose weight or whatever." They sign up for personal training. Cool. They may not be the most motivated person ever, but even for that person to show up at the gym, whatever time, and to at least work out for 30 minutes, you know, that's the easy part to me. What is difficult is what that person is doing with the other 23 and a half hours of the day. So that's why I say nutrition or diet is more important than exercise. And kind of like what CJ said, I never really thought about, you can have a clean diet, be mindful of what you're eating, still lose weight, whatever. But you could be working out 7 days a week, eating trash all the time, is not seeing any progress. So that's just my take on it.
Facts. And to piggyback off of what you had said, so question was, what's more important, diet or exercise? I say both of them have their equal points. However, what I believe it's more so on consistency of both of them. So there's always there's a thing called the 80-20 rule. Sometimes I preach it, sometimes I don't. It really depends upon the client at that point. However, the 80-20 rule is explained pretty much 100% of your goals is from 80% of diet and 20% working out. But I break it down a little bit deeper and I say it's a 70-10-10 rule, or 70-10-10-20. Thank you. All right, so it's 70% comes from the diet. All right, and then 10% to make that 80 is true consistency doing the 70. And then there's 10% that comes from the workout, and then the next 10% is consistency within that workout, and then all of that takes care of the full 100. So to put it in the simplest way, what's more important? Diet's more important. And then after you get the diet, consistency. Once you get it from there, then I would say working out and then creating a consistent workout pattern or routine. And if you need help, then that's when you should reach out to somebody like us, a personal trainer, an expert in the field, and then being able to have your roadmap made for you. So then you won't have to go through any of the stuff that we had to go through.
Similar to consistency, I think it goes along with it. I think that's a great point, Alex. Is that I think that also patience is really important. If you're starting something new, such as resistance training, suppose you start to put on muscle. Within your muscle, there's glycogen that's going to increase. Okay, for every gram of glycogen that you store in muscle glycogen, you're also going to store 3 to 4 grams of water. So after 2 weeks, you look at yourself, you look at the scale, the number has gone up. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean you're on the wrong track. So that's one thing I want to just preach is patience with that, because it does take a while for these different adaptations to take place. So I think that I'd be remiss if I didn't, piggyback off of what Alex said with that.
And I just went on Facebook Live too, y'all. So I'm on my IG and I'm on my Facebook.
Oh, hey man, well, we got time for about one more question, Alex. If you want to pull from either live and. All
right, let's see. Oh, I got a lot of stuff going on here. Oh, give me a second. So much to do. All right, so here goes the question. Oh, I lost it. Doggone it. Give me 1 second. Somebody might be going on live saying something. Oh my! This is so much. You gotta ask it. It's so much, y'all. I got a lot going on. I wasn't expecting this.
All right. I got a question that we should probably address. We're gonna get to it. Staying fit during the quarantine. Let's talk about it. Ike, I'm going to you first. We talked a little bit about it, but let's say a little more exercise specific. What are some strategies that you're going to recommend people go towards?
Obviously, like I said, if you have nothing, the first thing is going to be like body weight exercises. One thing I can recommend is to purchase a good set of resistance bands. That's like the next best thing, in my opinion, to having any kind of free weights or machines. Even with those resistance bands, they'll add resistance to those body weight exercises. So a couple good things that I like to think of are, if you have a pull-up bar, of course, pull-ups are going to be a great movement. Push-ups, as we mentioned earlier, controlling the eccentric, the lowering portion of the movement, putting your feet up on the couch to incline, make it a little bit more difficult. Air squats, I like lunges, whether they be forward lunges or reverse lunges. You can also do kind of like a glute bridge. So the glute bridge, of course, is the movement that you see a lot of the females doing in the gym, where they either have their backs flat on the floor or propped up on a workout bench. Obviously, you're probably not going to have a barbell to place in your hip crease. But what you can do is, if you have like a hip circle resistance band type, you can put that above the knees, push the knees out a little bit to make sure there's enough tension, and perform the hip thrust, driving the hips to the ceilings, contracting the glutes as hard as you can. What else? A couple other good ones as far as core workouts for me: planks, side planks, any kind of plank variation, like core stability moves. And that's kind of like the first things that pop into my head if you are limited with equipment during this quarantine and you're still trying to get good exercises in, as opposed to getting caught up in rep schemes, 4 sets of 10, 3 sets of 12 or whatever. One thing that I've been seeing a lot too, and I agree on, is doing things for time. So instead of 3 sets of 20, 3 sets of a certain exercise for 60 seconds. Guarantee you can't do push-ups for 60 seconds, so you're going to get a good workout in. And that's with anything, and like I said, if you've got those resistance bands, then that can just take your own workout a step further.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of, and then when you're going to start to realize that, okay, I feel good, even though the gym is a luxury, of course. And then you're going to start to realize that those are kind of the movements, even some of the calisthenic movements, that are things you can keep into your regular routine once the gyms do open back up. I found myself in that boat, and I was like, man, I need to do push-ups more because it's a lot more difficult than they used to be.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's all good stuff. Especially, I agree with you about the core stuff without getting into it too much.
Yeah.
I like more of like isometric holds or something where you're hinging at the hips, as opposed to something a lot of people, I guess this could have gone back to one of the questions we said before, where you see people misperform the most. Mm-hmm. And I think core exercises could be one, because you see a lot of people just hammering out exercises where they have flexion in their back for core. So I think it's cool that you mentioned planks. Mm-hmm. But to go a different route, also you could. There are different ways to progress. One, a good one that you mentioned was like switching to tension workouts. So how long you're performing that for. Another one could be limiting rest. But I also like the idea of going to unilateral work, where you're only on one leg. So instead of like a back or like any sort of squat on 2 legs, a Bulgarian split squat would be a good one. Instead of a deadlift, try especially if you lack ankle and hip mobility, this is a great time to work on that. So a single leg deadlift. Now mechanically, you want to make sure your non-working leg in the back is coming up at the same rate that your torso is descending, and you want your hips to still go forward. Like you also mentioned the hip thrust. Single leg hip thrusts are a good one, especially with the band. So those are some that, going from bilateral to unilateral work is a way, a different form of progressive overload, and just a way to work on ankle and hip mobility. If that's something that, because like most people when they go in the gym, they start off by doing, a back squat on 2 legs, and some people just never have implemented unilateral work into their workouts.
I agree.
I wanna take this to some fundamentals. So I don't think there'd be much contention in saying, like, a lot of our programs, they kind of have a foundation of like basic movements, right? Push, pull, and then say a leg movement, which you can put into like a hinge, squat, or lunge. And so with people's workouts right now, I want to go through 3 starting exercises that kind of incorporate those movements, and talk about the kind of the logic behind
And
it.
abs. Somebody just asked abs. What's the best stomach? What's the best workout for stomach area? Add in that too. Somebody just asked on Facebook.
All right. Starting with what I was gonna start with. I'm gonna say for your starting workout, a good place to start is going to be push-ups, the hip thrust that we've been talking about, and an inverted row. All right. So with the inverted row, I bring that up. Just I think ideally it'd be a pull-up, right? If you don't have a pull-up bar, then you're going to be limited there. If you have a table that can support your weight with you hanging off of it, you grabbing the edge of the table. This thing, it put some heft on it. Throw some weight on there. But then doing an inverted row, right? So movement where I'm pulling myself up and in. That's one of your best options for back right now. And back is, I think, a pretty commonly neglected muscle, and it's super fundamental. That pulling motion. For the push, I think the push up. I could talk a ton about progressions and regressions. And I think to keep it super simple, if you work on a incline with your feet inclined, it's going to be a progression. If you work with your chest up, so your feet are on a decline, it's going to be a regression. So easier or harder.
Another thing real quick, CJ,
Please.
with the push-ups, as far as like incline, decline, as far as your hand width spacing as well. The closer you are, you got more triceps. About shoulder width, you'll hit more pec, triceps, and shoulders. And then the further out you go, you're going to hit more just pecs. So
That's true. And that's
play
a good
around
point
with
too.
the spacing as well of your hands.
Side note, we got about 1 minute and 30 seconds left on my live Instagram. I didn't know there was a time limit.
Okay, so do your push-ups, do your rows, and then I said the hip thrust instead of like a squat, and the reason I said that is just because your glutes are weak, your legs probably aren't. So now's the time. Go ahead, strengthen your glutes, unilateral or bilateral, so 1 glute or 2 glutes working together. As far as core, Brandon told me this exercise. Go ahead, lay down on the ground, and then what you want to do is pick up your scaps so that they're off the ground, and then pick up your legs so they're off the ground, but make sure your core is tight so that you're pressing it into the ground itself. All right, your practice, that's your core. Man, you give me that time crunch, and I was like, what do I say?
That wasn't a time crunch. That was me demonstrating what you were talking
my
about.
bad. Okay.
Are we skipping
52 seconds.
Basically, so here's the thing: your abs, they're in between your hips and your ribs, right? And then on the back side of that is your spine. So as far as resistance goes, lifting, with your ribs and above. So I gave the scaps as a reference, and then partaking in some kind of hip flexion. That they're going to be responsible for maintaining that bridge in between. So drive your spine into the ground, lift up those 2 points, and then you can put as much resistance onto your core as you can. I think visuals would have been really helpful for a lot of this conversation, but I'm down for some more content. So, Alex, you are talking and I cannot hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I think he's muted.
I think you did it on purpose.
I did.
And I thought the computer messed up.
Got you. All right.
So we had 84 people on my up on my IG. So woo.
Okay. All right. So I'm still
All right,
streaming on
man.
YouTube right now. Any closing remarks? Anything anyone wants to touch us on before we head on out?
I think if anybody's still out there watching who's kind of worried about losing the progress they've made with the gym closures and everything through this quarantine, just get up and move whenever you think about relaxing a little bit more. Because I was talking with CJ before this even started. I said I find myself just trying to avoid sitting on the couch because I know if I sit on the couch, I'm gonna be there for a couple hours. So sit in uncomfortable chairs that are gonna force you to get up. Put your phone somewhere. If it goes off, you got to get up and just set yourself up for success instead of woe is me, because we're all in the same situation at this time.
Yeah. To piggyback off of that, I definitely there's this idea that when one thing goes wrong, everything's out the window. Everything that you've done up until this point is not going to go away in 2 months. So, but what that said, we want to do whatever we can to maintain it, and then it's kind of goes along with what I spoke about last time. Take this time, if you can, to work on some things that you might not normally do in the gym. Think about it as an opportunity. to work on things that, that, like I said, like you don't do in the gym, and just don't panic to the point where it's like, oh, the gym's closed, so everything's going to go out the window. So I'm not also going to let my diet go. And because that's a common mentality, but like, I wouldn't worry about it to the point where you think, because I know a lot of people just think, oh, I'm going to be so fat after, or like, oh, I'm going to lose all my muscle after these 2 months. That's not how it works. If you've been resistance training or just training for X amount of time, like, do what you can at home. And then on top of that, if your activity levels decrease, like Ike mentioned before, decrease your intake too.
Yeah, just be mindful about everything that you're doing now,
Yeah, not everything goes out the window.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right.
CJ actually just got the Facebook propped up, so IG's done. Facebook's still going.
I mean, I think we're done here. Unfortunately,
so.
I think this went really well. I'm down to do it again. We can talk about that sometime. But yeah, I hope people at home were able to find our conversations helpful, and hopefully found some motivation to to keep up their activity, while it is that we're all stuck at home.
Most def.
Cool.
All right. Well, I'll be talking to everyone soon.
Thank you,
All right.
CJ.
Yeah,
Of
thanks for
course.
getting this organized, Siege.
See y'all later.
All right, later.
Yes.
Later.